their name and who they're representing. And then we will pose the first question. And also check out the bios are in your program documents. So, Reverend Vanessa?
Sure. I'm Vanessa Hawkins. I am the designated Presbytery Associate Leader with Giddings-Lovejoy Presbyterian.
Hi, my name is Miriam Foltz. I'm serving as the pastor of UKirk St. Louis. UKirk, or University Church, is the Presbyterian campus ministry at Washington University and St. Louis University.
And my name is Paula Bujewski. I'm here representing First Presbyterian Church of Ferguson.
And I'm Joy Myers, and I am the stated clerk for the Presbytery of Giddings-Lovejoy, but I also serve as the treasurer for Presbyterian women in Giddings-Lovejoy Presbytery.
My name is Cathryn, and I'm the founder of All Among Us and the executive director of the Women's Care Center.
Okay, so I'll pose the first question of the day, and then we'll each panelist will speak to that for 3 or 4 minutes, and then at the end we'll open it up for questions or discussion. In this changing world, the Presbyterian Women of Giddings-Lovejoy organization faces a declining membership, which corresponds to the decline we are experiencing in churches within the Presbytery. How do you see our PW maintaining an active membership and being one that will attract younger women? Who would like to start with that?
Well, I'll start. Just jump right in. I think that to maintain our participation in Presbyterian women, one of the first things is we need to talk about it more. It's one of the best kept secrets in the church. Women have been active since the church began in second mile giving and in mission, and we don't talk about that stuff. We talk about our meetings, we talk about when we're getting together, we argue about varieties of subjects, but we don't talk about our mission and our goal and what we do, and we need to do that. The second thing that we need to do is we need to be flexible. Now, I don't like change any more than anybody else does, but the world is changing, and if we don't change with it, we can't attract new people. If we're only going to meet on Wednesday morning, that leaves out a whole lot of women who could participate if the meeting date was changed. Yep. I remember being in my first call as a pastor, and the congregation started looking at, they had 4 circles, and they said, but you know what, we're missing a whole group of women. So we're going to pay for childcare for stay-at-home moms to come. And they did that, and they started another circle with childcare available, and those moms loved it and came and formed another circle, and that was wonderful. But 2 of the circles met at night, and 2 of them met during the day. So this mom circle could choose when they wanted to meet. It was absolutely wonderful, and it helped. But too many of us are sort of stuck in that mode of, we're not going to change because we like it the way it is. And we need to reach out if we want to reach another generation of women.
I would say there's a generation of women who need you all. So what I would say is mentoring. I'm sure each of you can think of a young woman in your life, and let's just say a young woman from the age of 20 to late 40s who needs you. They need the wisdom you have, they need the spiritual foundation that you have, they need your life experiences. And when you start mentoring someone, you start walking with them, then there's an amazing opportunity to volunteer with them. And then when you start volunteering with them, both your worlds are opened up. And what we just keep going back to is it's not this generation and then that generation. It's not those who have and who those don't have. It's that God has called us to live in community. So when I'm looking at this group of women and kind of the age group in here, I'm saying who was invited today that was under the age of 30? Who specifically was invited to say, you know what, I'm going to pay for your child care today. Come with me for this retreat this weekend. You will be fed. And it takes that understanding, I think, the gift that you all have, and how God is calling you today to use that. I bet you all have a story of someone who mentored you when you were a young Christian or a young mother, or who maybe, I was just thinking of a family that we're involved with who just had a baby born, stillborn this week. I can tell you that family needs you all walking with them today. It's so rich what God has given you, and don't stop using that. Don't stop using that when you get to an area that you just, it's really easy for you guys to come today. You don't have to jump through hoops to do that. God's calling you to something bigger than that. So I would say mentoring young women, inviting them in, and stepping into their world with volunteering, because young people today are 100% into volunteering.
Well, I've not been a part of a PW circle, but I've worked in 3 churches that have active circles. Most of them are daytime circles. Unfortunately, I've not been able to participate as a result of that. But when I was asked this question, when this question was shared with me that it would be asked today, of course I started thinking about in what ways can we change things to make it more inviting. And so what I do know is that if I ask my girlfriends, hey, do you want to come to a PW circle meeting with me? They're not really interested in that. But if I ask, hey, do you want to go to this dinner or this lunch with me? We want to support this organization. That they respond to. And I was talking with a group of women from 3rd Presbyterian Church. They're sitting out here, over here. And that conversation kind of mirrored some of the things I had been thinking. And I think they said that your circle meets after church on Sundays.
Yes.
Would you mind sharing for a moment what you shared with me? Because they're doing this already. So.
Thank you. I was sharing with her that we have we don't call them circles, we call them ministries. And we have a women's ministry, and we meet on the 3rd Sunday of every other month. And when we meet, we attract all age groups. And we have guest speakers about mental health, just a host of enlightening subjects. They plan retreats, they plan gatherings, they go bowling sometimes, and the group that's in charge seem to attract all age groups, and therefore we get a lot of participation. We serve them a hot meal to be sure they're comfortable in staying longer, and it's been successful. Thank you.
And I just want to add to that recently, First Presbyterian at Kirkwood had a fundraiser lunch for All Among Us. And what we learned in doing that there is that, first of all, it started out as a PW event, and the treasurer said, I think we need to do just the women of the church, which obviously makes sense. But there were people who showed up to that event that not only don't attend PW gatherings and maybe have never been to Church Women United event, like myself, but they hadn't even been in church for a while. But they were so interested in knowing about what was going on with that they came. So it's just something to keep in mind.
And something else you shared that I love, you feed people and you have fun. And so in every event you do, think about food and think about fun. I'll come.
I've been speak on the food topic, working with college students. Thinking of the young adults that I engage with every day, as I was thinking about this question of membership alone, membership has changed culturally, especially for younger generations. Folks are hungry and yearning for relationships. They're wanting to be personally invited. They want to be engaging, especially in their journeys of faith. And yet, the understanding of, again, it's on the calendar, I'm going to show up every week, those habits have shifted. I'm still not entirely sure what the future looks like. Again, I'm still learning even just about the basic technologies around communication that young adults use today. But this understanding that kind of the strains that have held the church together over the centuries really highlights our need for community. We're a church of the resurrection. We can let things die to see what grows in their place. This remembering that when Craig first came to the Presbytery, I'll never forget, he said in his first sermon when he was preaching at a Presbyterian gathering, he said, "No church that Paul founded is still active today." and I repeat that to myself a lot, and we are constantly re-envisioning how God is calling us to be together in community. And so we have to be asking, again, I come today not with any answers, but with the questions of what does it look like to gather today? First and foremost, food is there, both a physical food and a spiritual food. I was thinking a lot around, again, what is it called? What is our call to be Christian women, especially Presbyterian women? And it's this reminder that the first person to proclaim the gospel was Mary Magdalene, and that we are called to proclaim the gospel, whatever that looks like in each of our congregational contexts, as well as broader community contexts. So we have to be asking those questions of how are our gatherings helping us to proclaim the gospel, to live out Christ's grace with one another, and to live out Christ's grace in the world. So I'm excited to be a part of this conversation with you all. But again, food and community and that deep hunger for the world, I think those are the questions that should be driving us as we look forward to the future.
When I started thinking about this, there were so many different experiences that came to mind. One was the mid-90s. I was in seminary, midway, at home for the summer. And my nephews, who were 8 and 9, were playing with 2 of their other friends. And they are on the computer, their Xbox, and on the other computer is another game, and they're watching wrestling on television. And they're talking to each other. And I looked at those children and I thought, I will never be able to communicate with them. And I understood that being the child that I was, I grew up with pen and pencil, crayons and paper, that their brains were developing in a way that would increase the gap. There's always a generational gap, but it is profound now.
Yeah.
And they're talking about, if you want to work with, be intergenerational, then there are 2 things that we have to do. First, you have to learn how the younger generation thinks, what their beliefs are, what their values are. And you have to examine your own values and beliefs and how you think. We grew up, okay, I'm 57, those of us who are 57 and older, we grew up in a world where we thought the world would be like our parents' world. And that's how we were prepared. This very stable existence is not the same. Change is what these kids grew up with. That's all they know is change. Nothing is expected to be the same. And if we're not flexible, then we can't provide or create a space that's welcoming for a generation that we don't understand. I have a 22-year-old living with me right now. I do not understand that child. And my mom says it's because I have no patience. But I do study her, and I do ask questions, and I do sit, and we do argue a lot because her world is different than mine. But I have to make room within myself for her so that she can be all that she wants to be, and that I can create a space where she can experiment and become the child that God has created her to be. Presbyterian women, I'm probably going longer than I should have. You have done some wonderful things. You were created in a time when you were really needed to construct a particular type of space for women. But that space has expanded far beyond what you can provide now. And so the question becomes, what do you mean when you say active membership? Do you expect it to look the way it did in the 50s, 60s, 90s, 2000? And what does it mean for you to, when you say attract, what does it mean for you?
At this time, does anyone have a question for any of our panelists? Or maybe your church is already doing something that was mentioned that you'd like to share?
I just want to say, Vanessa, we have to accept change, like it or not, right? But we have to realize that change, just for change's sake, is not good. Because unless it's changed to make something better, to improve not only our dialogue and our conditions, we're going backwards, not forward. And I look at the civil discourse, or the uncivil discourse that we're having today, that is certainly changed, but I don't think it's changed for the better. So I would like to know how you think when we accept change, we can predicate that it be changed to improve, not to digress or go back.
I think there's several things you have to consider. First is the fact that to make room for change first starts within us.
Right.
A lot of times we want to try something new and do something new, but we don't do the work internally that we need to do in order to create an expansive space. And so first is self-examine. Do we want someone to come in and just be like us? We'll let you in. Or do we want to first do the work of asking ourselves, why do we want new people? What type of space are we providing? Are we willing to become something different? So there's the internal work that you have to do. And that's done with you, God, the Spirit. And you can do it individually and collectively. And the second part is that you do hold on to your standards. A lot of times I grew up with a mother who didn't just talk about love. I understand love as being an action. It's embodied in the person. And as I watched my mother love a plethora of people according to their needs, I would have questions. Because these understandings of what it means to be faithful would be tested. You see, what this world is requiring us to do is not just do the physical change, but to do the spiritual, theological, philosophical changes that we need to do, which means you can't do it by yourself. So you have to be in conversation with each other, with the group that you're planning to be with, but you also have to be in conversation with God and with your theology. The church is on the back end of change. I have been doing this work for so long. I have sat at tables within the Presbyterian Church since the 90s, where what we're facing, we were facing a long time ago. At first we denied it. Then we held on because we had enough money, endowments, to stay as we were and not change. now we're at a point where we can see the end. I mean, literally, because we're not intergenerational. And we don't live in a world where, you know, in the past, our children would become the church. We don't live in that kind of world anymore. Our children are not going to our churches. And so, I'm not saying change for change's sake. I'm saying do the work that will help you create a space to become the church that God is calling you to be, which means that you do the discernment part first. And this is, I mean, I could talk about this forever, so let me stop. Because I wrote 9 pages just thinking about this and all the different resources I went to think about this, because I've been thinking about it for so long. I came into this because I asked God this question. I lived on a church and on a street. There were 4 churches. And I was young, so I'm going out at night, coming home at late, and there are children out in the streets. And I said, God, now you say your church is a beacon, and I see them doing nothing in this community. So what does it mean to be the light in the world? And it always points outward. But we as a church want people to come inward. And that is unraveling us. So that's a long answer to your question.
So I didn't write anything, but I've got to tell you, this civil unrest has to happen. And I'm going to speak to this as a white woman. I'm going to speak to this as a woman of privilege. If we listen to God's word, and if we go to God's word, we have got to be uncomfortable where we are today. Okay? And this is just something that breaks my heart. When I decided to do this nonprofit 2.5 years ago, my prayer was, God, break my heart for what breaks yours. And what has broken my heart is that when I go into my own church, and we have about 2% Black community in my church, that breaks my heart. Okay? It breaks my heart. God calls us to live together, to be sisters in Christ. When we say that your children aren't coming to church, it's because we're not making a place here that welcomes them. Shame on us. So when we're trying to capture these children, our first thing is the church needs to leave the building. Leave the building. Okay? Go out and be Jesus to these people. Go out and minister and love, provide love, care, and dignity. If you leave today with 3 things, go out today and provide somebody with love, care, and dignity. And provide it to someone who looks different than you. I remember telling somebody that I was making some changes in my life that I was feeling pretty good about. And his question back to me is, when's the last time you've had a Black family to your house for dinner? And I said, last time. I haven't had a first time. Shame on me. Okay, it's not what God calls us to, you all. So this civil unrest that's going on right now is because God is calling us into his story. God's calling us into his story. It's okay to be uncomfortable today, but we've got to keep walking toward Jesus.
Would anyone else like to speak to that question? Joy?
Well, I just want to say change is going to happen whether we want it to or not. The difference is going to be probably how open we are to it. To changing the things that we hang on to. I was just telling someone the other day, I was trying to let go of some things that generally make me feel really good. And I know this sounds crazy, but I like my home to be clean and tidy, but I spend a lot of time doing it. And in this last year, for some reason, I'm almost 54 years old, but suddenly it's occurred to me that, hey, this ain't so important. It really isn't. So that's a trivial thing, but it's taken me a lot of time to just start letting go of some of it. And it feels good. So I don't want to do things the same way we've always done them. There's so much opportunity to not do that. So anyway.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I can speak to, from a process perspective. Presbyterians, we like process. We like to have order and grace mixed in. A a lot of times when, within the UKirk network, I've been in contact with other campus ministers doing this startup work. And I have shared this resource I created that's basically a resource inventory, asking a series of questions about, in this context for churches who are wanting to start a campus ministry, again, looking at the motives, first and foremost, starting with the personal discernment of why are we interested in this? Why are we interested in change? But the second piece of it is recognizing our resources. We are still, even as the church is changing, even as the church is in decline, we are an incredibly resourced church, both in terms of human energy, human passion, as well as financial resources. That recognition that even in the midst of decline, we are incredibly blessed. In the midst of this resource inventory, it goes deeper into these questions of, again, what are the goals that we're setting? At the end of the day, a lot of change is just, I use the metaphor a lot in campus ministry of throwing pasta at the wall and seeing what sticks. A lot of times we don't know what will work until we try. And so part of that flexibility piece is being willing to try and being open to redefining our understanding of success and failure. A lot of times I feel a lot of fear before UKirk gathering, and a lot of the fear is around, again, what if no one shows up? And I have to step back, and people always show up. I have to remind myself of that, but I have to step back and think about how I define failure. And failure to me would be not having the event in the first place, not inviting people to come in the first place. And so a lot of it, again, in this resource inventory, is thinking through our process for change, not just saying, oh, well, we're just going to change the time without thinking through, again, how do we foster those conversations with folks about what their interests are, what their needs are, how and when are they wanting to meet, how are they wanting to organize gatherings, which really comes to the central point of there's so much need for investment in our world, of inviting more folks to the table. Again, around diversity, around racial diversity, around age diversity. We live in an ever-segregated world. Working with young adults, in some ways they are more equipped to talk about diversity than any generation before. Even the 10 years difference between students today and myself, I feel like they are more equipped to have these conversations. And yet, they have grown up in a world where they have been more segregated along racial lines and especially along class lines. And so it is so important to have the church be that space for building those bridges across divisions. And again, it won't happen naturally because we live in a segregated world. But with intention, with creative thinking processes, and again, with that kind of mutual invitation to not just organize events, again, to be that beacon of come to us, but to really have a process to think through how do we begin to go out into the world and to engage through relationships of getting to know other people, to come up with new systems, new ways of doing things, and to embrace change, not because it's going to happen overnight, but because we're actively working each and every day to try things a different way.
And if we go back to the Bible, oh goodness, as we think about what the early Christians did, they went out. They didn't stay home behind closed doors, and they didn't do things the same way they always have. They went out and they explored and they examined what the needs were in their world, and they dealt with the needs. So if we want to stay behind closed doors, we're really not living up to that Christian doctrine that has come to us over the centuries. And I keep thinking about if Paul hadn't taken all those journeys and started all those churches that are no longer. Hey, my goodness, what would have happened to us? And would we be here today? And what would the world look like without us? So, I just want to go back to that Romans thing. All things work together for good. Why? Because God is at the base of everything that we do. If we believe that, and if we work toward that, and if we pray for that to be true.
And you know the most segregated hour of the week, right?
It's
Sure.
Sunday, 11 o'clock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. We have a short time left for another question if someone has a question.
My only question is, this is being recorded. I'd like to know how we can get the recording and maybe take it back to our own churches. Because I've thoroughly enjoyed this and I think it needs to be shared. Good question.
I'm going to say some point today you'll have that information. How's that?
Okay.
Definitely some things, and she'll figure it out and let us know.
How about, can we also get all those pages you wrote? I've got 9 pages. Right.
We'll expect to see that in the next e-newsletter.
The dissertation.
I'll clean it up and make it presentable.
Okay.
Anyone else that has notes, I think, we could do a Google Doc, and everyone can sort of add to it, if you wanted to. Just having this conversation is the first step, and I would encourage you to continue to have this conversation as you continue to desire to grow. Dialogue is powerful, and in the beginning was a word.
True, we do need to continue having this conversation. We will do that. Anyone else want to say like a brief closing remark before we go on?
Be the roving microphone here.
I agree with everything everyone has said about the church and speaking out. Excuse me. Another thing I think we need to do is accept people where they are. My husband and I have had a personal experience in this. My youngest stepdaughter is gay, and when she announced this, and my husband's a Presbyterian minister, and when she announced this, it was earth-shattering. And we didn't have a relationship with her for about 5 years. And it came to me that if we want to have a relationship with her, we have to accept her where she is. And we have done that, and we have a wonderful relationship, and with her partner, and with that acceptance from St. Louis, they live in San Diego, has reverberated through them to their friends saying, oh, we wish we had parents like you who love us where we are and show God's love.
Always remember that Jesus desires a relationship with your daughter. And I suspect Jesus has a relationship with your daughter. So all we have to do is follow Jesus.
That she does.
Thank you.
I'm
One
so
quick.
grateful for this. Yeah.
I'm sorry, did I cut in on
You
you?
have 30 seconds. 30 seconds. Okay. All right. First of all, change is not going to come. It is here. I don't even know how to use my cell phone very well. So there are certain things in our daily lives that I personally need to improve. And this reminds me of the Michael Jackson song, Take a Look at Your Face in the Mirror. And I don't mean just your face that you see, but your spirit in the mirror. Oh, is it 30 seconds already?
Yes.
Oh, 10 more. The only thing I believe that is constant in our lives is change. It used to be death and taxes. I guess we could tack that on to the end of it, that it's still change. If you don't change, you will disintegrate.
Thank you all. These ladies will be around for a little bit, probably around the gathering, and so if you want to talk with them, or probably we can get emails or whatever you want to exchange questions or have a little bit more discussions. And we definitely will have another time in the future for more discussion. And we appreciate you all doing this with us. Next time we probably should allow more time.